His secretary scheduled his divorce attorney appointments, thinking I was clueless about their affair. She'd giggle when I called, knowing he was planning to leave me penniless. Everyone at his office knew the plan except stupid me, or so they believed. The day the divorce was finalized, I revealed what I'd really been planning all along. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in March when I found Tyler's phone buzzing against the marble countertop at 5:47 a.m. Not unusual, except he was still asleep beside me, and the message preview read, "Can't wait to see you today, handsome." My fingers hovered over the screen. In 23 years of marriage, I'd never once invaded his privacy. Trust had been our foundation, our unspoken agreement. But something cold slithered through my chest as I watched that message disappear, replaced by his usual alarm at 6 sharp. "Morning, beautiful," Tyler mumbled, reaching for his phone with practiced casualness. His thumb swiped the screen clean before I could blink. "Sleep well." "Like a rock," I lied, studying his face for tells I'd never needed to look for before. He smiled, the same boyish grin that had charmed me in college. But something felt rehearsed about it now, like he was performing rather than simply being. When had I started feeling like an audience to my own husband's life? The restaurant receipt fell from his jacket pocket 3 days later as I gathered clothes for dry cleaning. Chez Laurent, Thursday evening. I remembered Thursday clearly because I'd made his favorite pot roast and eaten alone again. The receipt showed 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, 1 shared dessert. The kind of intimate dinner we hadn't had in months. My hands trembled as I held the thin paper, imagining Tyler across from someone who wasn't me, sharing creme brulee while I scraped his untouched dinner into Tupperware containers. The betrayal felt physical, a sharp twist beneath my ribs that stole my breath. "Find anything interesting?" Tyler's voice from the doorway made me jump. I turned, the receipt still clutched in my palm. For a moment, we stared at each other across the chasm that had somehow opened in our bedroom. His eyes flicked to my hand and I watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Just gathering your dry cleaning," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He nodded slowly, but his gaze never left my face. "Thanks. You're always taking such good care of me." The words felt like mockery, though his tone remained gentle. I wanted to throw the receipt at him, demand explanations, fight for what we'd built together. Instead, I smiled and tucked it into my pocket. "Of course, honey. That's what wives do." But that night, after Tyler fell asleep with his phone clutched protectively against his chest, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and wondering when I'd become a stranger in my own marriage. The computer password discovery came 2 weeks later. I'd gone to print our tax documents from his home office, something I'd done countless times over the years. But when I tried to log in with his usual password, our wedding date followed by my initials, the screen flashed red. "Incorrect password." I tried variations. Our anniversary. His mother's birthday. The dog's name. Nothing. After 15 years of sharing everything, Tyler had locked me out of his digital life as efficiently as changing the locks on a house. The realization hit me like ice water. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough that he'd started covering his tracks. My reflection in his dark computer screen looked older than I remembered, more fragile. When had those lines appeared around my eyes? When had my husband started seeing me as a threat to be managed rather than a partner to be trusted? The phone calls to his office became a special kind of torture. Megan's voice grew progressively sweeter each time, like honey laced with poison. "Oh, hi there, Mrs. Matthews. Tyler's in a meeting right now, but I'll be sure to let him know you called." Her tone suggested she knew exactly why he couldn't come to the phone, and it had nothing to do with business meetings. There was an intimacy in the way she said his name, Tyler, not Mr. Matthews, that made my skin crawl. "Could you ask him to call me back? It's about dinner tonight." "Oh, I think he mentioned he'd be working late again. You know how dedicated he is to his projects." The barely concealed laughter in her voice made me want to reach through the phone and shake her. Instead, I thanked her politely and hung up, feeling more foolish each time. The office Christmas party crystallized everything I'd been trying not to see. Tyler had been distant for weeks, claiming stress about year-end deadlines, but he'd perked up considerably when I'd mentioned skipping the party. "You should go," I'd insisted, not wanting to be the wife who kept her husband from office social events. "I'll stay home with a good book." But something nagged at me as I watched him dress with unusual care, selecting his best suit and the cologne I'd given him for his birthday, cologne that had sat untouched on his dresser for months. I changed my mind an hour after he left, arriving at the downtown hotel just as dinner was being served. Tyler's back was to me as I entered the ballroom, but I spotted him immediately at a corner table. What I saw next felt like a physical blow. Megan sat beside him, not across from him as a professional colleague might, but close enough that their shoulders touched. She wore a delicate gold necklace that caught the light as she laughed at something he whispered in her ear. My breath caught in my throat. That necklace. I'd admired it 6 months ago in the jewelry store window during our last anniversary shopping trip. It's beautiful, I'd said, tracing the display glass with my finger. Tyler had glanced at the price tag and shaken his head. $3,000 for a necklace? That's a bit excessive, don't you think? I'd agreed, of course. I always agreed. But seeing it now, draped around another woman's neck while she basked in my husband's attention, the practicality felt less like wisdom and more like dismissal. I slipped out before Tyler noticed me, my face burning with humiliation. How many people at that party knew what I was only beginning to understand? How many pitying glances had I missed over the months? How long had I been the oblivious wife, the last to know her own story? The breaking point came on a rain-soaked Thursday in April. I'd returned early from my book club, cancelled due to the weather, and heard Tyler's voice from his home office. The door was slightly ajar and something in his tone made me pause in the hallway. I know, sweetheart. Just a few more months and this will all be behind us. My blood turned to ice. Tyler had never called me sweetheart. It was too saccharine for his taste, he'd always said. Honey, beautiful, love. Those were his endearments for me. Sweetheart belonged to someone else. The lawyer says we can expedite everything once I file. She won't see it coming, she's too trusting for her own good. Each word hit like a physical blow. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, afraid my legs might give out. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning my destruction. By Christmas we'll be free to do whatever we want. I promise you won't have to sneak around much longer. The casual cruelty in his voice, discussing my future like a business transaction, ignited something I didn't know existed inside me. The hurt remained sharp and constant, but it was joined by something harder, colder. Something that whispered, if they want to play games, I'll show them how it's really done. I backed away from the door silently, my mind already racing. Tyler thought he was dealing with the same trusting woman who'd never questioned a late night or challenged a suspicious receipt. But that woman had just died in the hallway of her own home, replaced by someone who understood that love without wisdom was just another word for victim. Let them think I was clueless. Let them believe their secret was safe. They taught me that marriage could be a performance, and I was about to give the performance of my life. The game was just beginning and they had no idea they'd already lost. The transformation didn't happen overnight. For 3 days after overhearing Tyler's phone call, I moved through our house like a ghost, smiling when he looked my way, nodding at his lies about late meetings. But inside, something sharp and calculating had awakened. Something that studied his patterns with forensic precision. That's when I remembered Josh Reynolds. Tyler's business partner had always been peripheral to our social circle, present at company functions but never lingering for small talk. He was the numbers guy, Tyler often said dismissively, as if mathematical precision was somehow less valuable than Tyler's flashy deal-making. But I'd noticed things about Josh that Tyler had missed. The way he listened before speaking. How his eyes tracked inconsistencies in presentations. The quiet intelligence that didn't need to announce itself. More importantly, I'd heard through the professional grapevine that Josh's wife had left him 6 months ago. Another casualty of infidelity, according to the whispered conversations at charity luncheons. If anyone would understand the particular sting of betrayal, it would be him. I spent 2 weeks studying Josh's routine with the methodical patience of a hunter. His gym was downtown, 3 blocks from the coffee shop where Tyler sometimes held client meetings. The same coffee shop where Josh appeared every Tuesday and Thursday at precisely 7:15 a.m., ordering black coffee and sitting by the window with his tablet. On the 3rd Thursday I was there waiting. Josh. I approached his table with carefully practiced surprise. I thought that was you. He looked up from his financial reports and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition followed by wariness. We both knew this meeting wasn't accidental. Sarah. Good to see you. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Would you like to sit? His directness caught me off guard. No small talk about the weather or feigned surprise at the coincidence. Just an invitation to skip the pretense. I'd like that, I said, settling into the chair. I was hoping we might have a chance to talk. Josh closed his tablet and leaned back, studying me with the same analytical gaze I'd observed at board meetings. About Tyler? The question hung between us like a bridge I could either cross or retreat from. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice remained steady. Among other things, something shifted in his expression. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding. I assume you know about Megan. Hearing it confirmed so matter-of-factly should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt oddly relieved. No more pretending, no more dancing around obvious truths. I do now. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? Josh's smile was thin but genuine. The same thing you're going to do with what I tell you about Tyler's recent business decisions. That first conversation lasted 2 hours. Josh spoke with clinical precision about Tyler's increasingly erratic choices. Partnerships that made no financial sense, investments in companies that existed only on paper, sudden changes to profit-sharing agreements that benefited Tyler disproportionately. I've been documenting everything, Josh said, sliding a manila folder across the table. Initially for my own protection. Now I think it might serve a different purpose. The folder contained copies of emails, financial statements, and meeting notes that painted a picture of a man whose judgment had become fatally compromised. But more than that, it revealed something I'd never suspected. Tyler had been systematically positioning himself to cut Josh out of their most profitable ventures. He's planning to freeze you out, I realized aloud. Eventually. But first he needs to minimize his assets for the divorce proceedings. Hard to claim poverty while holding majority stakes in 3 successful companies. The casual way Josh dissected Tyler's strategy impressed me. No emotion, no wounded pride, just clear-eyed analysis of betrayal as a business problem to be solved. What do you need from me? I asked. His answer surprised me. Nothing. Yet. But when the time comes, I'll need someone who has access to Tyler's personal files. Someone he trusts completely. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Over the following weeks, I became a different person entirely. Tyler saw the same compliant wife who packed his lunches and asked about his day. But that woman was a carefully constructed mask worn by someone much more dangerous. While Tyler worked late or claimed to, I worked too. His home office became my classroom, each document a lesson in the scope of his deception. Tyler had always handled our finances, claiming I was too emotional for such practical matters. I'd accepted this characterization because it seemed to make him happy to be needed. Now I understood it had been a strategy. The offshore account was hidden behind 3 shell companies, but Tyler's arrogance had left breadcrumbs. Bank statements tucked behind tax documents. Investment reports buried in insurance files. Account numbers written on sticky notes and forgotten in desk drawers. Each discovery felt like swallowing glass, but I photographed everything with steady hands. The beach house in Costa Rica I'd never heard of. Stock options in companies I didn't know he owned. Retirement accounts that should have been joint but were listed only in his name. By conservative estimates, Tyler had hidden nearly $2 million from me over the past 5 years. Money that should have been ours had been systematically funneled into accounts I couldn't access, properties I couldn't claim, investments that would disappear the moment he filed for divorce. But Tyler's greatest mistake was underestimating me. While he was busy covering his tracks from lawyers and judges, he never bothered hiding anything from his simple wife. Credit card statements lay open on his desk. Email accounts remained logged in on the home computer. Financial documents were filed with the casual organization of a man who believed himself untouchable. The evidence file grew thicker each night. Screenshots of email exchanges with asset managers. Photos of bank statements showing suspicious transfers. Recordings of phone calls made from the landline extension I'd learned to activate silently from the kitchen. But the most damaging discovery came accidentally. I'd been photographing a stack of investment reports when I knocked over a small wooden box on Tyler's desk. Business cards scattered across the floor. Contacts from conferences, potential clients, professional networking events. Mixed among them were cards for private investigators, divorce attorneys, and offshore banking specialists. But it was the handwritten note tucked beneath them that made my blood freeze. Handled the Cayman transfer. New account details attached. Destroy after memorizing. Megan wasn't just Tyler's mistress. She was his accomplice in financial fraud, actively helping him steal our marital assets. The secretary who giggled at my phone calls had been enabling theft on a massive scale. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a glass of wine and Josh's business card, finally understanding the true scope of the game being played against me. Tyler thought he was divorcing a naive housewife who would accept whatever scraps his lawyers threw her way. Instead, he was about to face someone who now understood his business better than he did, backed by a partner who had his own reasons for wanting Tyler destroyed. I picked up my phone and typed a simple message to Josh. The Cayman account. We need to talk. His response came within minutes. Tomorrow. Same place. Bring everything. As I prepared for bed, Tyler was still working late. But for the first time in months, his absence didn't hurt. I had work of my own to do, and unlike his, mine was built on truth instead of lies. The student had become the master and class was about to begin. Josh was already waiting when I arrived at the coffee shop the next morning, his usual black coffee untouched beside a spread of documents that looked deceptively casual. I slid into the seat across from him, my purse heavy with the evidence I'd gathered, a weight that felt both terrifying and empowering. The Cayman account, I said without preamble, placing a manila envelope on the table between us. Tyler's been moving money there for 3 years. Megan's been helping him. Josh opened the envelope with the careful precision of a surgeon, his expression unchanging as he reviewed the photographs and bank statements. When he finished, he looked up with something that might have been admiration. This is more than I hoped for. More than enough to trigger a fraud investigation if we need it. He paused, studying my face. The question is, what do you want to happen to them? The question hung in the air like smoke. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Or something more complex? Something that would require Tyler and Megan to understand exactly how thoroughly they'd been outplayed? I want them to destroy themselves, I said finally. I want to give them just enough rope. Josh's smile was sharp and approving. Then we're going to need Tyler to trust you completely. Can you do that? The challenge in his voice sparked something fierce inside me. Watch me. That evening, I launched my performance as the grieving wife who desperately wanted to save her marriage. Tyler was in his office again, ostensibly working, though I suspected he was texting with Megan, when I knocked softly on his door. Tyler? Could we talk? He looked up with barely concealed irritation, but something in my expression must have triggered his guilt because his face softened into what I now recognized as his practiced sympathy mask. Of course, sweetheart. Come in. I sat in the chair across from his desk, the same one where I'd discovered his hidden documents just days before. Now it felt like a stage, and I was about to give the performance of my life. I know things have been difficult between us lately, I began, letting my voice crack slightly. I feel like I'm losing you and I don't know how to fight for us anymore. Tyler's discomfort was palpable. He shifted in his chair, his fingers drumming against his desk in a rhythm I recognized as nervous energy. Good. Let him squirm. Sarah, He cleared his throat, reaching for words that wouldn't come easily. I've been under a lot of pressure at work. It's not about you. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that I almost marveled at his skill. How many times had he practiced these deflections? Maybe we could try counseling? I suggested, allowing tears to well in my eyes. Or we could take that vacation we've been talking about. Remember how we used to talk about Tuscany? Tyler's face went through a series of micro-expressions: panic, calculation, false hope. He was probably thinking about how a vacation would interfere with his timeline for leaving me penniless. That sounds wonderful, he said finally, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. Let me see what I can clear from my schedule. I reached across the desk and took his hand, feeling the gold wedding band that had once symbolized forever. Now it felt like evidence of a crime in progress. I love you so much, Tyler. I know we can work through this. His squeeze in return felt like a handshake with a stranger. Over the following weeks, my relationship with Josh deepened into something that surprised us both. What had started as mutual benefit, two betrayed spouses plotting revenge, evolved into genuine partnership. Our morning coffee meetings became strategy sessions, then extended conversations that ranged far beyond our shared mission. Josh possessed a quiet integrity that felt foreign after years of Tyler's flashy manipulation. Where Tyler performed honesty, Josh simply lived it. Where Tyler made grand gestures, Josh offered steady reliability. "You realize this could get complicated," Josh said one Thursday morning, his hand briefly covering mine across the table. The touch was electric and we both felt it. "Everything's already complicated," I replied, not pulling away. "The question is whether we can stay focused until this is finished." "And after it's finished?" The weight of possibility hung between us, but I forced myself to step back. Tyler and Megan thought they could have their cake and eat it too, an affair and financial security. I wouldn't make the same mistake. "After it's finished, we'll see who we are when we're not defined by what was done to us." Josh nodded, understanding the wisdom and patience. But the attraction remained, simmering beneath our professional collaboration like an ember waiting for the right moment to ignite. Meanwhile, Josh's concerns about Tyler's business judgment provided perfect cover for our investigation. Board meetings became intelligence-gathering sessions where Josh questioned Tyler's decisions with increasing boldness. "The Morrison deal doesn't make sense," Josh said during one particularly tense meeting, his voice carrying just the right note of professional skepticism. "The numbers don't add up and the timeline seems artificially rushed." Tyler's defensive response, a rambling justification that revealed more than it explained, told us everything we needed to know. He was making increasingly desperate moves to position assets before filing for divorce, and his judgment was compromised by the pressure of maintaining two deceptions simultaneously. But our most effective weapon turned out to be Tyler's own arrogance combined with Megan's eagerness to prove her usefulness. I began leaving careful breadcrumbs for Megan to find, conversations Tyler could overhear, documents left strategically visible, phone calls timed for maximum impact. The first test came when I staged a phone conversation with my sister while Tyler was in the kitchen, speaking just loud enough for him to hear. "I'm so worried about him, Linda. He's been working such long hours and I found some business documents that looked concerning. Something about offshore accounts. I don't understand finance, but the numbers seemed huge." I watched Tyler freeze in the doorway, his coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips. The panic that flashed across his face was deeply satisfying. Within 2 days, Josh reported that Tyler had suddenly developed an interest in streamlining their international holdings. Megan, Josh's sources told him, had been asking detailed questions about asset protection strategies. My false concern had triggered exactly the response we wanted. Tyler was moving money in ways that would be easy to track and harder to justify legally. The next planted seed was even more effective. During another private conversation Tyler was meant to overhear, I mentioned receiving a call from an old college friend who worked in financial forensics. "She specializes in finding hidden assets in divorce cases," I said into the phone, my voice trembling with manufactured worry. I told her I was probably being paranoid, but she said I should document everything just in case. She even offered to look over our financial records for free. Tyler's reaction was swift and predictable. He suddenly became the attentive husband again, suggesting we simplify our financial arrangements to make things easier for you to understand, sweetheart. What he was really doing was moving assets even more aggressively, each transfer creating a paper trail that Josh was carefully documenting. But the most delicious irony was watching Tyler convince himself that he was protecting his secrets while actually exposing them. Every lie he told in response to my planted fears revealed more about his strategy. Every reassurance he offered Megan, conversations I could hear through the thin walls of his office, gave us deeper insight into their timeline. "She doesn't suspect anything," I heard him tell Megan one evening. "If anything, she's becoming more dependent on me. This will be easier than I thought." As I stood in the hallway listening to my husband discuss my destruction with his mistress, I felt no pain, only cold satisfaction. They thought they were playing chess while I was learning checkers. They had no idea I'd already achieved checkmate. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic as I signed for them. Tyler wasn't home. He'd started staying at his downtown apartment more frequently, claiming the tension at home was affecting his work. In reality, he was probably celebrating with Megan, toasting what they believed would be their victory. I read through the filing with clinical detachment, admiring the thoroughness of Tyler's deception. According to his attorney's narrative, I was an unstable, financially irresponsible wife who had contributed nothing to our marital assets. The proposed settlement was insulting, enough to rent a modest apartment and buy groceries, but nothing approaching what I was legally entitled to after 23 years of marriage. What Tyler didn't know was that I'd been meeting with my own attorney for 6 weeks. Catherine Brennan was nothing like the theatrical divorce lawyers Tyler preferred. She was quiet, methodical, and had built her reputation dismantling the financial fortresses of cheating husbands. When I'd shown her my evidence file, her eyes had lit up with the predatory gleam of a shark sensing blood in the water. "We're going to let them think they're winning," she'd explained during our strategy session. "Your husband's arrogance will be his downfall. Men like Tyler never read the fine print when they think they're getting everything they want." Now, sitting in my kitchen with his divorce petition, I understood exactly what she meant. Tyler's lawyer had crafted agreements that looked devastating to me on the surface but contained language that would actually protect my interests once my hidden assets were revealed. Every concession I would make in court was carefully designed to benefit me in ways Tyler couldn't comprehend. The first hearing was scheduled for October 15th. I had 4 weeks to perfect my performance as the devastated, helpless wife. I started by hiring an obviously incompetent attorney named Robert Walsh, a man whose reputation for losing high-profile cases was exactly what I needed. Tyler's surveillance would reveal that I'd chosen poorly, confirming his belief that I was too emotional to fight effectively. Meanwhile, Catherine remained invisible, officially representing me only as a financial consultant, while she orchestrated the real legal strategy. The courthouse performance required every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I dressed in subdued colors, carried tissues in my purse, and let my shoulders slump with defeat as I walked past Tyler and his high-powered legal team. "Mrs. Matthews," Tyler's attorney began with practiced condescension, "your husband has been more than generous in his settlement offer. Given your lack of contribution to the marital assets and your history of financial irresponsibility." I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, letting my voice crack as I interrupted. "I just want to be fair. Tyler worked so hard for everything we have. I don't want to be vindictive." The judge's expression softened with sympathy, while Tyler's lawyer smiled like a cat with cream. They saw exactly what I wanted them to see, a broken woman who knew she was beaten. Each concession I made felt like a small victory. When I agreed to waive my claim to Tyler's offshore holdings, I could practically see him relaxing in his chair. He had no idea that my waiver specifically excluded accounts I could prove were hidden fraudulently, a distinction that would become crucial once Josh's business investigation went public. When I tearfully accepted a smaller share of the house sale proceeds, Tyler's attorney actually patted my shoulder in mock sympathy. What they didn't realize was that my smaller share was calculated based on the house's artificially low appraisal, an appraisal that would be challenged once my real attorney revealed Tyler's attempts to devalue marital assets. But the most satisfying moment came when I signed away my rights to Tyler's legitimate business interests. The document was thick with legal language that Tyler barely glanced at, trusting his attorney's assurance that it protected all his assets. What Tyler missed, because his arrogance made him sloppy, was the clause defining legitimate business interests. Any holdings connected to fraudulent activity or financial misconduct would remain part of the marital estate. Since Josh's investigation would soon reveal Tyler's pattern of financial irresponsibility, my signature was actually protecting my claim to the most valuable assets. While the legal theater played out in court, Josh was orchestrating his own performance in the boardroom. Tyler had become so focused on the divorce proceedings that he was missing the corporate coup happening under his nose. "I'm concerned about Tyler's judgment lately," Josh said during a board meeting I learned about through carefully planted sources. "The Morrison deal was a disaster, and these offshore investments seem incredibly risky." The other partners had begun to notice Tyler's erratic behavior. His absences from important meetings, his distracted performance during client presentations, his defensive responses to legitimate questions about company finances. Josh had built a coalition slowly and carefully, never directly attacking Tyler but simply raising concerns about fiduciary responsibility and protecting shareholder interests. By the time Tyler realized what was happening, Josh had already secured the support needed to call for a comprehensive financial audit. The audit was Tyler's worst nightmare. Not only would it reveal his hidden assets, but it would expose his use of company resources to fund his personal offshore accounts. What Tyler had thought was clever asset protection would be revealed as embezzlement. But perhaps the most entertaining development was watching Megan's growing desperation as the divorce proceedings dragged on. She'd expected Tyler to be free and financially secure within weeks. Instead, she found herself dealing with a man increasingly consumed by legal battles and mounting pressure from his business partners. I watched their relationship crumble through carefully observed details. Tyler's increasing irritability when she called. The way he'd silence her when she brought up their future plans. The tension in his shoulders when she appeared at the office. Megan, for her part, became increasingly demanding. She'd built her fantasy around becoming the second Mrs. Tyler Matthews, complete with the lifestyle she'd observed from the outside. The reality of dating a man facing potential financial ruin was less appealing than she'd anticipated. Her work performance suffered as her anxiety increased. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd been making mistakes, missing important calls, scheduling conflicts, even showing up late to meetings. The competent secretary who'd once been Tyler's secret weapon was becoming a liability. The breaking point came when Megan made the tactical error of confronting Tyler during a particularly stressful week. I wasn't there to witness it, but Josh's sources in the office reported the shouting match that erupted in Tyler's conference room. "When is this going to be over?" Megan had demanded, her voice carrying through the supposedly soundproof walls. "You promised me we'd be together by Christmas. Now you're saying it could take months longer." Tyler's response was cutting and brutal. "Maybe you should focus on your job instead of our personal life. I have bigger problems to deal with right now." The aftermath was swift and predictable. Megan's confidence, already shaken by weeks of uncertainty, finally cracked completely. She began making increasingly desperate attempts to secure Tyler's attention, each one pushing him further away. By November, Tyler was avoiding her calls and working from home more often, not because he wanted to spend time with me, but because he couldn't handle Megan's mounting hysteria. The woman who'd once been his escape from marital problems had become another source of stress. As I watched their affair implode under the pressure of my carefully orchestrated chaos, I felt no sympathy for either of them. They'd planned to destroy my life for their temporary pleasure. Now they were destroying each other and I had front row seats to the show. The irony was perfect. Tyler's attempt to escape one difficult woman had trapped him with an even more demanding one, while the wife he'd planned to discard was systematically dismantling everything he'd built. Justice had never tasted so sweet. The judge's gavel fell at 3:47 p.m. on a gray December afternoon, making our divorce official with the kind of bureaucratic finality that reduced 23 years of marriage to a stack of signed documents. Tyler sat beside his attorney, shoulders relaxed for the first time in months, practically radiating satisfaction as he believed he'd successfully orchestrated the theft of our shared life. I maintained my performance until the very end, dabbing at my eyes as the judge explained my generous settlement. Tyler even had the audacity to reach over and squeeze my hand in what observers would interpret as comfort but felt more like a victory lap. "I'm sorry it had to end this way, Sarah," he murmured as we gathered our paperwork, his voice pitched for the judge's ears. "I hope you'll be able to move on and find happiness." The practiced sincerity in his tone might have fooled anyone who didn't know him as well as I did. But I heard the barely contained triumph underneath, the relief of a man who thought he'd pulled off the perfect crime. "Thank you for being so understanding through all of this," I replied, my voice appropriately fragile. "I know this was hard on you too." Tyler's attorney, clearly pleased with the outcome, shook my incompetent lawyer's hand with something approaching pity. "Your client was very reasonable, Robert. This could have been much more contentious." As I walked out of that courthouse, divorce decree in hand, I felt an unexpected hollowness. Not for Tyler. That man had died for me months ago. But for the woman I'd been when I'd first walked up those same courthouse steps to get married in 1998. She'd believed in forever. She'd trusted completely. She'd never imagined that love could be weaponized. That woman was gone, and while I didn't mourn her exactly, I acknowledged her passing with something that wasn't quite grief but wasn't quite relief either. Tyler drove away in his BMW, probably heading straight to Megan's apartment to celebrate. I sat in my car for a long moment, watching the courthouse empty as other people's dramas played out in scheduled intervals. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Josh. Phase 1 complete. His response came immediately. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Time to finish this. Tyler spent that evening in what I can only assume was celebratory bliss. Through our still-shared Netflix account, I could see he was watching comedy specials until well past midnight. The man who'd just legally stolen from his wife was apparently in a mood to laugh. I spent the evening reviewing documents with Catherine, my real attorney, ensuring every detail was perfect for what would come next. We'd built our trap with precision and now it was time to watch it snap shut. The call came at 6:23 a.m. Sarah. Tyler's voice was sharp with panic, cutting through the early morning quiet. Did you know about this board meeting? I let confusion color my voice, still playing the role of the ex-wife who understood nothing about business. What board meeting? Josh called an emergency session. Something about financial irregularities. I don't understand why he'd. Tyler's voice cut off abruptly, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. I'm sure it's just routine business stuff, I said with practiced innocence. You always said I wouldn't understand these things. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note I'd never heard before, genuine fear. Sarah, if anyone asks you about our finances, about offshore accounts or anything like that. Tyler, you're scaring me. What's wrong? But he'd already disconnected. The emergency board meeting convened at 9 a.m. in the glass-walled conference room that had hosted so many of Tyler's triumphs. This time he walked in to find Josh seated at the head of the table, Tyler's usual position, with a stack of documents that represented months of careful investigation. Gentlemen, Josh began without preamble, we have a serious problem. Tyler took his seat with the careful composure of a man trying not to show fear, but I'd learned to read his tells over the years. The way he adjusted his tie twice. The slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his coffee. He knew something was catastrophically wrong. Over the past several months, I've been documenting concerning patterns in our company's financial management, Josh continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. What I've discovered amounts to a systematic diversion of company resources for personal gain. The presentation that followed was masterful. Josh laid out Tyler's offshore accounts, his use of company funds for personal investments, his manipulation of profit-sharing agreements. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source, Megan's own digital trail. These emails, sent from Tyler's secretary's company account, detail the movement of funds to accounts outside our normal business operations, Josh explained, projecting Megan's messages onto the wall screen. Ms. Patterson appears to have been instrumental in facilitating these transactions. Tyler's face went white as he read Megan's helpful messages about handling the Cayman transfer and updating the new account information. Every communication she'd thought was helping him had actually been creating evidence of their conspiracy. This is ridiculous, Tyler said, but his voice lacked conviction. These accounts are perfectly legitimate business investments. Investments that coincidentally increased dramatically during your divorce proceedings? Josh's question hung in the air like a blade. Investments that your ex-wife waived all claims to in court yesterday? The room fell silent as the other board members processed the implications. Tyler hadn't just stolen from the company, he'd orchestrated his divorce to benefit from the theft. The vote was swift and unanimous. Tyler was removed as CEO effective immediately, pending a full forensic audit and potential criminal investigation. Security would escort him from the building within the hour. As Tyler gathered his personal belongings under the watchful eyes of security guards, his phone rang constantly. Megan, no doubt, wondering why her calls to his office were being redirected. She would learn soon enough that she was unemployed too. The professional network in their industry was surprisingly small and remarkably efficient at spreading news. By lunchtime, word of Tyler's dramatic fall had reached every major firm in the city. By evening, the details of Megan's role in facilitating financial fraud were common knowledge among the executive assistants and office managers who formed the backbone of the business community. Megan's attempts to find new employment were met with polite rejections and sudden interview cancellations. Her resume, once impressive, was now toxic. Companies couldn't afford to hire someone whose loyalty could be purchased, whose ethics were so obviously compromised. The woman who had giggled at my phone calls, who had worn my dream necklace to my husband's office Christmas party, who had helped steal my future, now found herself unemployable in the only industry she knew. Within 2 weeks, Megan had quietly left the city, her social media accounts deleted, her professional connections severed. The rising star who had thought she was trading up from secretary to trophy wife had instead become a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and boardrooms across the business district. As for Tyler, he learned that afternoon that his generous divorce settlement had been based on fraudulent financial disclosure. My waiver of offshore assets applied only to legitimate holdings, not stolen funds. My acceptance of reduced property claims was contingent on honest asset valuation, not the artificially deflated appraisals he'd arranged. Every concession I'd tearfully made in court contained language that protected me once his crimes were exposed. The man who thought he'd played me for a fool had actually signed agreements that would leave him with almost nothing once the legal dust settled. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a glass of wine, watching the sunset through windows that would soon belong entirely to me. Tyler's desperate voicemails filled my phone. Pleas for understanding, promises of explanation, threats disguised as warnings. I deleted them all without listening to the end. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't always swift. But when it finally arrived, it was absolutely perfect. 3 months after the board meeting that ended Tyler's career, I was in my garden when the doorbell rang. I'd been planting herbs in the raised beds I'd built where Tyler's golf putting green used to be, basil and thyme and rosemary that would actually serve a purpose beyond his weekend ego maintenance. Through the front window, I saw a figure holding what looked like flowers, and for a moment my heart skipped with an irrational fear that he'd finally snapped completely. But when I opened the door, the man standing on my porch looked nothing like the confident predator who'd planned my destruction. Tyler appeared smaller somehow, his shoulders curved inward as if he were protecting himself from invisible blows. His expensive suit hung loose on a frame that had lost weight, and his eyes carried the hollow look of someone who'd discovered that consequences were real. "Hello, Sarah." His voice was tentative, nothing like the commanding tone I'd lived with for over 2 decades. "Tyler." I kept my hand on the door, ready to close it if necessary. "What are you doing here?" He held out the flowers, grocery store roses wrapped in cellophane, not the elaborate arrangements he used to send to impress other people with his generosity. "I was hoping we could talk. I know I don't deserve it, but I've been doing a lot of thinking and I realized." "You realized what exactly?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He'd probably practiced this speech, rehearsed the right combination of remorse and charm that had worked on me so many times before. But something in my tone told him this wouldn't be like those other times. "I made mistakes," he said, the words sounding like they'd been memorized from a self-help book. "Terrible mistakes. I lost sight of what was really important, and I hurt the one person who'd always been there for me." I watched him deliver his lines with the same detached interest I might feel observing a documentary about extinct species. There was something almost pitiable about his performance. This desperate attempt to resurrect a relationship he'd murdered himself. "I know I have no right to ask," he continued, "but I was hoping we could try again. Start over. I've learned so much about myself these past few months, and I think we could have something even better than what we had before." The audacity was breathtaking. This man who'd systematically stolen from me, who'd planned to leave me penniless while he started a new life with his secretary, was now suggesting we could rebuild on the ashes of his betrayal. "Come in," I said finally, stepping aside. Tyler's face lit up with hope so genuine it was almost heartbreaking. He'd mistaken my invitation for forgiveness, not understanding that I simply wanted privacy for what came next. I led him to the living room, the same room where we'd hosted dinner parties and watched movies and argued about thermostat settings. Now it felt like a stage set for the final act of a very long play. "Can I get you something to drink?" I asked, playing the hostess role one last time. "Coffee would be great. Just like you used to make it." I returned from the kitchen with 2 cups and a manila folder I'd been keeping in my desk drawer for exactly this moment. Tyler was studying our wedding photo on the mantel, his expression soft with what looked like genuine nostalgia. "I've missed this place," he said as I handed him his coffee. "I've missed us." "Have you?" I settled into my chair, the folder balanced on my lap. "Tell me, Tyler, what exactly do you miss about us?" He launched into another rehearsed monologue about partnership and trust and shared dreams. I let him talk, watching his hands gesture with practiced sincerity, noting how he avoided eye contact when he claimed to have never stopped loving me. When he finished, I opened the folder. "That's interesting," I said, pulling out the first photograph. "Because according to this email you sent to Megan in September, You were planning to finally be free of that burden by Christmas. Tyler's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips as he stared at the screenshot of his own words. And this bank statement, I continued, laying out the next piece of evidence, shows you moved $200,000 to your Cayman account the day after I asked about taking that vacation to Tuscany. Each document hit him like a physical blow. The phone recordings, the financial transfers, the business emails where he'd referred to me as the problem that needs solving. You see, Tyler, I know exactly what you missed about us. You missed having someone too trusting to question your lies. You missed having a convenient cover for your financial crimes. You missed having someone to blame when your house of cards finally collapsed. His face had gone pale, but I wasn't finished. You thought I was too stupid to see through your affair with Megan. Too emotional to understand business. Too dependent to survive without you. I leaned forward, my voice steady and cold. I was just smart enough to let you believe it. The moment of recognition in his eyes was everything I'd hoped for. The dawning understanding that every conversation, every argument, every tearful plea for our marriage had been performance. That while he'd been playing chess, I'd been playing a completely different game. How long? He whispered. How long did I know? Since March. How long did I plan this? Since the day I heard you promise Megan you'd leave me penniless. Tyler set down his coffee with shaking hands. Sarah, I never meant. You never meant to get caught. There's a difference. He tried several more times to explain, to justify, to somehow rewrite history into something more palatable. But every word only demonstrated how completely he still misunderstood what had happened between us. When he finally left, his shoulders were even more curved than when he'd arrived. The flowers lay forgotten on my coffee table, already wilting in their plastic wrapping. That evening Josh called. How did it go? He asked. Exactly as expected. He still thinks this is about hurt feelings instead of calculated justice. Are you all right? The question surprised me with its genuine concern. Over the months of our partnership, Josh had become someone I could trust completely, a rare gift after Tyler's betrayal. But we'd both been careful not to let our attraction complicate the mission. I'm perfect, I said and meant it. What about you? Ready for your new life as CEO? Josh had officially taken control of the company the week before, with unanimous board support. Tyler's removal had actually strengthened the business, freeing it from the toxic decision-making that had been slowly destroying it. It feels right, he said. But I wanted to ask you something. I'm moving to the Boston office to oversee the expansion there. I was wondering if you'd like to come with me. The invitation hung between us, loaded with possibilities and complications. 6 months ago I might have said yes without hesitation, trading one relationship for another. But the woman Tyler's betrayal had created was smarter than that. Josh, I said gently, we're both still figuring out who we are without our old lives. Maybe we should do that separately before we try to build something new together. His laugh was warm and understanding. I was hoping you'd say that. It means you've really learned to trust yourself. I have. For the first time in my adult life, I'm making decisions based on what I want instead of what someone else expects from me. We agreed to stay in touch, to let whatever might develop between us happen naturally rather than forcing it. Josh was a good man, honest in ways Tyler had never been, but I needed to discover who I was when I wasn't defined by any man at all. 6 months later I was grocery shopping when I saw her. Megan stood in the frozen food aisle, her cart half full of budget items and her appearance significantly less polished than I remembered. She looked older, more tired, wearing clothes that suggested either a different lifestyle or different circumstances. Our eyes met for a moment across the freezer cases. I waited for anger, satisfaction, some emotional response to seeing the woman who'd helped orchestrate my betrayal. Instead, I felt only mild curiosity about how her story had unfolded. She looked away first, pushing her cart quickly toward the checkout lanes. I continued my shopping, picking out ingredients for the dinner party I was hosting that weekend, a gathering of new friends I'd made through pottery classes and volunteer work. Tyler's final text had come 2 weeks before the grocery store encounter. I never meant to hurt you. I hope you can forgive me someday. I'd read it, felt nothing, and deleted it without responding. Not because I was angry, but because Tyler had become irrelevant to my life in the most complete way possible. I simply didn't think about him anymore. The woman who'd once measured her worth by her husband's approval had evolved into someone who trusted her own judgment completely. The future stretched ahead like an open road, and for the first time in decades, I was the only one deciding which direction to drive. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sarah revealed that evidence folder to Tyler, watching him realize every move he made was anticipated and countered. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.